Hello, my name is Başar Büyükkahraman and welcome to this course about fundamentals of web components. Web components is a suite of different technologies allowing us to create reusable custom elements, and we can encapsulate away our web components functionality from the rest of our code, and we can reuse them in any of our web applications. Web components consist of three main technologies. The custom elements is a set of JavaScript APIs that is allowing us to define custom elements and their behavior, which can then be used in our user interface. Shadow DOM is again a set of JavaScript APIs for attaching an encapsulated shadow DOM tree to an element, and this is rendered separately from the main document DOM. In this way, we can keep an element's feature private so they can be scripted and styled without the fear of collision with other parts of the document. And the last one is the HTML templates, and these are basically the template and slot elements which are enabling us to write markup templates that are not displayed in the rendered page. These can be then reused multiple times as the basis of our custom elements structure. With web components, without needing an external framework, we can create our own custom components. We can share them between our web applications. Web components functionality is coming with the browsers. Most popular browsers are supporting the most of the standards about web components. For unsupported cases, we will be seeing how we can use polyfills to make this unsupported functionality to work with that browser. So if you are ready, let's start learning the building blocks, which are the fundamentals of the web components. In this course, I will be using Visual Studio Code as editor. I will be using a couple of plugins of it, so I would suggest you to use this editor while following this course. You can download the latest version here and install it by following the steps in the installation wizard. The plugins I'm going to use are this comment tagged templates and this live server. This live server is going to be used to serve our index.html through this Visual Studio Code extension. And these comment tagged templates are going to be useful for syntax highlighting of our HTML markup written in text format. The VS Code is improving the productivity of our development, so I would suggest you to use that one too during the course. So let's start building web components. First, we will start with index.html. So here in the VS Code, I'm creating a new file here, and it is index.html, and we can use the code snippets from VS Code by typing exclamation mark, and here it is suggesting us this option, this basic HTML markup. So here we have the index.html, and let's say the title is web components, and saving this one and right clicking here and opening it with live server. So this is an extension for Visual Studio Code, and here it is, the live server. So clicking this one, I opened the Chrome side by side, and the live server is running at this port, localhost 5500, and this is the page index.html. We don't need to add the index.html part here. If you just go it this way, we are still receiving our page. This is the title we set, and this extension is like if we add anything right here, let's say hello, it is automatically restarting our application right here. So this is useful while we do our implementations. We have HTML elements, and we can see the list of them here, and we are using them to build our application. So there are h1, there are main, and we have this div, the buttons and the anchor tags, and also there are lots of others we are not using so frequently. And just like these elements, we can create our own elements. So we will do that. So the web components is allowing us to create our own custom components. We can create components with composing multiple built-in elements or custom elements. Within this way, we create reusable components. So, for instance, we can have our own custom button, which can be showing progress indicator until our action is completed. Let's start with that, but let's do it with the existing button first. Then we will build same thing with custom elements, and we will see the real benefit of it. Now, here in this page, let's have a button. And this is going to be printing log after 2 seconds. So let's say the button text will be print delayed log. So here we have the button on this page. I'm just zooming a bit here. Now, when we click this button, we will call a function. So first let's assign the function right here. The button has the attribute of onClick, and let's say our function name is long action. So as soon as we click this button, this function will be called. And let's implement that function right here, having a script block. And in this script, we will have the function, this long action, and we will just print, let's say, console log, hello console. So saving this one, the page is refreshed. So when we click this one, it's going to be printing this console log. So let's open the developer tools here, hitting F12. It is opening this part, and in the console tab here we see the hello console is printed. If I click multiple times, here we see the log is printed. By the way, I implemented the function like this, but let's use modern JavaScript features. Now let's replace this function with an arrow function. So we are going to assign this function, this arrow function, is a variable first. So we will have the variable, and for variable we used to have the var keyword, but now with the ES6 we have the const or let keywords. Const is for the variables which are constant, and let is for the variables which we can assign different values to it. So let's say the variable is const, let's say it is a long action, and here is the arrow function. The empty parenthesis is just like this one. We are not taking any parameters in this function, and the arrow part, and opening the curly braces, and just moving this console log into this function and removing the old one. So saving this one, and if I click it, here it is working. So when we click the button, we are triggering this function, but currently it is not printing this output in delayed, it is printing immediately. So let's add delay to it. Again, we are going to use another JavaScript functionality. We will use set timeout, and this is taking 2 parameters. The first one is the callback function. So this function will be called by when, and we set the when in the second parameter. Let's say 2000 milliseconds. So in 2 seconds this function will be called, and in this function we will be just running this console log. So saving it, and let's click the button. We don't see anything yet, and the console log is printed. Now let's update this logging a bit more. It's not very clear when this action is called and when this console log is printed. So let's do it this way. Here, let's log the time. Let's print the date, and let's also log the time when we run this console log part. So saving it. So here I clicked it. We have this output, and then we have this hello console, and it is exactly 2 seconds after the first one. In an actual application, this delayed behavior can be seen in cases like sending data to backend or loading data from backend. So in these circumstances, we would want to show some kind of progress to user. So user would be aware that the client is working on that action. Otherwise, user cannot understand if the button is really clicked or if there is any action in progress or not. So let's show some kind of progress here. Again, let's go with a simple feedback. Let's just change the text of button to loading. For that, we will change the button text dynamically in this JavaScript. So first, let's get the reference to this button, and let's assign it to a variable here. Let's call it button, and we will get this button with the document, and the document is the object of the root node of this HTML document, and it has functionalities like query by selector, and we can pass the selector as the element name button. So this would be looking for the button element in this HTML and then returning that element back to us. Or we can set ID to this element. Let's say this is a classic button, and we can get that button by querying it with its ID. We can pass the parameter like this with # classic button. So if we are querying based on the ID, we have to add the hash and then the ID to it. And we can also query based on the element without adding any prefix to it. Or we can query based on the CSS classes assigned to this element. And in that case, we use the dot. So the button may have a class of something like this, btn, so we can query it based on this one. But let's go like this. So we have the button with this ID, we got the reference to it, and here when we are in progress, we are going to change this button text to, let's set like this, button text content. Let's say it's going to be loading, a simple text like this one. But after this operation is completed, we want to return back to the original value, which is print delayed log. So we can go like this. We can either just copy and paste it here, and we can just set the print delayed log. So this would work, but let's not repeat ourselves here. Let's have the original value first, like this. Let's say original button text, which is just the button text content. So we have the value. Then after the timeout, we can just set it back. So let's save this. And let's click the button. Here the text is changed and returning back to the original value after the async operation is completed. So this is working, but let's click this button a couple of more times. So clicking multiple times, and here we see there are problems with it. One of the problems is we are able to click the button even there is an ongoing progress. And here in the end we see the console logs are printed a couple of times, and also the button is having this loading text, even all delayed actions are done. Let's make sure user cannot click when the action is in progress. So we will disable the button during that time. Let's do it right here. Now we are setting the text content of the button. Button has disabled attribute. And we will set it like this, button set attribute. And the attribute name is disabled. And this is actually a boolean, but for value we can set anything we want. In HTML elements we have to set the values as string. So if any value is set for a boolean attribute, it is considered as true. So let's say it is true. And after the timeout, we are going to back to enabled state, which means we are going to remove the disabled property. We cannot do it like this. If we just set the button set attribute to false, this is not going to work because element attributes are string. So even we are setting the value of a boolean like true or false, it is not actually processed as a boolean. It is just processed as a string, regardless of their value, is considered as true in JavaScript. So to enable the button, we have to call remove attribute method of the button, and we don't need to pass any true or false value to it. We just say we want to remove the disabled attribute. So let's save this and try this one. So we will click multiple times, but clicking the first one and clicking a couple of more times, and we only see it is just running one time. And also we can see the button is disabled, the visibility of the text or overall coloring is changed. Now let's change the style of this button. So here, adding a style element right here in this head. And let's have a class of btn. And we are going to use this class in this button. Let's say class is going to be btn. And let's go step by step. Let's say the background color of this button will be color like this one. So this is blue color, this one. Let's save it. So the button is like this, and let's set the text color, the color as white, and let's remove the border by setting border to none. And let's also add some radius to the corners with the border radius. Let's say it is 7 pixel. And also let's add some padding. We are going to add padding to left and right and not the top and bottom. So for the top and bottom it's going to be 0, but for the left and right it's going to be 2 REM. And also let's set a font family, so we can do whatever we want here. I'm just going like this one. And let's add a box shadow here. The X coordinate will be 0 pixel and the Y coordinate will be 4 pixel, and this is 40 pixel. And the shadow color is going to be this one. And it's going to be a bit transparent like this. Save it. Here we have a shadow right here. Of course, you can set your own style. This is just my example. You don't have to do the exact things. And here we have the button, but this is not doing anything if we hover on it, so it's not it looks like just an image. So let's make it a bit more reactive. So let's set btn hover. This is the style applied during our mouse is hovering on the element. So let's say the background color is going to be something like this. So just typing this one, 1D80F0, saving this one, and if I hover the button, it is a bit showing some changes. And let's also set a color for the disabled, btn disabled. And let's say the background color will be like this, 6AA8F0. So this is going to be applied, this disabled is going to be applied when the button's disabled attribute is set. Let's try like this, disabled is true. Saving it. Here we can see that this disabled style is applied. And also, since our this click function is setting the button attribute, we will see the effect right here. Here, color is changed. Now the button looks better. Let's do one more enhancement on this button. Let's make this loading text to be fading out to emphasize more about something is going on in the background. So adding a new class right here, let's call it fading, and we are going to do an animation here. So our parameter is animation, and we are going to run an animation of fading. We will define it below, and this is going to be taking half seconds, and it's going to be repeating infinitely. And here we will define the keyframes for this fading animation, and in the 0% it is going to be the color. This time let's change the color of our text. So the color will be, the color is like this, 6AA8F0. So we will be using this disabled color, and in the 50% the color will be white, and in the 100% it is going to be this color once again. So we can see the effect of it right here. Let's say fading, and here we see the text is fading out and in. Now we are going to apply this style dynamically. So when we click the button, and as soon as we are updating it like this, showing the loading text, disabling it, and we will add that class, that fading, to this element. So we will call button, and it has class list, and in this list we are going to add the fading. And after this operation is done, we will remove that class from this class list. We call remove, and we will remove fading. So saving this one, and let's see how it's going to work. Here we are seeing the text is fading, and as soon as the operation is completed, we are back to our original button. So we have completed our implementation. Now we have a button with some good enough feedback to user about an ongoing action. So we extended capability of regular button with more user-friendly button. So far we haven't done anything about the elements. We created some basic scenario for ourselves to see the benefit of the web components. Next we will see how we can do these things with a custom element, and we will see how it is turning this implementation to more reusable way. Now we have this button and we can use it in forms like login, register. But when we do that, we will have to repeat ourselves. Let's pretend like we have such case. Let's change button text to login first. And here in this script part, let's update these variables. Let's say this is going to be just selecting all the buttons here, and this is going to be a login button. And let's also update this ID. Let's call this one button login. And here we are using the same ID. And let's update the method as just login. And let's repeat the same steps for the register. Let's say we will have a register button right here, just copying and pasting this one. And this is for register. We will have a register method, and this button will have the register text in it. And we will have the exact same things right here. So let's say in the login we will just print, let's say this is a login response. We no longer need to print the date here. We will not do that also here. And in this one we will have, let's select all the login buttons and replace it with the register button. And we have this classic button register and using it right here. And this function is register, and let's say this is register. Let's remove this console log and let's change this part to, let's say this is going to be register response. And we don't need to print the date anymore. So saving this, and we have two buttons. This one is login, clicking this one. Here we are seeing the login response, and if you click the register button is reflecting the progress, and we receive the register response here. So these functions are almost identical. The only difference is the real action, this part. So this is making it harder to reuse this logic. But also in future, if we want to update the behavior, we have to find all the used places in our code base and update each one by one. Of course, we can refactor this implementation by extracting these parts to separate functions, and then we can use those functions both in this login and this register functions. But instead of doing that, we will convert this button to custom element. The function here is dealing both with the behavior of our button and the actual action, which is, for instance, a register or the login operation. With custom elements, we will be handling that element-related operations like changing the text, setting disabled, setting different classes in it. We will be handling within the custom element itself. So instead of copying and pasting the implementation, we can create our own custom button component, and that component will be reusable because of the nature of web component. So let's do that. So here in this script part, right after our functions, let's create a class. Again, we are using the class of ES6. So we will have a class, and let's name our class as button, or we can say my button, any name you want. And this button is going to be extending HTML element. In this element, we have this constructor. And if we are implementing the constructor, then we have to call the super, which is the HTML elements constructor. And we have the basic element definition right here. And so we will register this element by running custom elements define. And we will give a name to our component. And as a rule, we have to have a name separated with dash. So for my case, I'm going to set my element, my custom button, as app-button. So we must have this dash in the name of our custom element. That's the rule. And as a second parameter, we are passing the class having this button implementation. And that is this button right here. So this way, we are defining a app button element. We will use it in our page. And that element is actually this button class we have here. So we can use this app button right now. So if I go right here, just adding this app button, that's it. Let's save this. For now, we see nothing on the page, but if we go to here in the Elements tab, here we have the login button, we have the register, and we have this app button right here. But since there is nothing in it, we don't have anything to display with it, it is invisible. So to make it visible, we can set value to its inner HTML like this. In here, the constructor after super, I'm setting this class, this button, which is actually an HTML element, has this inner HTML, and let's set it to, we can set anything we want here. Let's say this is hello, saving it, and here we are seeing the hello, and the same element is right here, having the hello in it. Now we are going to move the implementation we have here, like the text content change, attribute, disabled attribute change, and the class list. We will move that into this button, but let's have an interaction to it first. So just like any element, custom element also has onClick attribute. And let's say we want to run this temp function we have here. Let's define it here. So the temp is here. And let's say this is temp. So if we go and click this one here, we see the temp is printed right here. And if we click the register function is called. Now let's change the inner HTML part. We can use the HTML elements here too. So like this one, we can say the button. And we can say this is a button having a text like this. Let's say custom. Saving it. And here we have this button. And if I click, it is printing this temp. This function is called. And also we can set the class for it. We can make this button look like this one. So we can set the class. Again, we are going to use the double quotes here. So that we can type btn right here. But since the inner HTML is also having this string assignment, and since we are using this double quotes within our string, we can just change this one to like this, single quote. We wrap it with single quote so that we can use the double quote within our actual string. So let's save this one. And here it is like the others. So we have just seen the basics of an element. Now let's get rid of this temp function and this app button. Now we are going to replace this button with the app button we just added. So just replacing the button with app-button, and the closing part also will be app-button. Now let's save this. Now there are a couple of issues here. Let's focus to this custom button here, just selecting this one. Here we have the app button having this class button, and in this app button we have this button element, we are having this inner HTML within this app button, so that's why we have this custom button right here. So the first thing is we no longer need to set the class for the app button. We are not going to set a class for that one. So removing it. Now it looks better because currently we are just styling this button, not the app button. The app button is wrapping the button component in it. And the other problem is even we set the login as the button text, we are seeing this custom because this is coming from this one. So we are actually rendering this button and we have the value here, custom. So in regular button, we were setting the text like a child element to it. So we were setting the register inside of it. We can do the same thing for this one too, this new custom button, but we will see that practice later. For now, let's pass this button text as attribute, like this onClick or this ID. So we will set text as login. This can be any attribute name you want. So I'm just using text. So we can just remove the login part. We are already setting this text right here. And here in this button, we can get that value like this get attribute. And our attribute name is text. So this is going to be returning back the text. Let's assign it to a text variable here. Now we are going to use this text here. And we can do it like this. We can convert this string to string literals by having this in backticks, not single quotes. So in backticks, we have this string. This is string literals. And for this part, we can use this text variable like this. $, curly braces, and in this curly braces we use the text, this variable. So saving it, and here we are seeing the login text here, and if we click the login button, here we are seeing the style is broken. Here in this login function we are setting the style and attributes for the component, this app button. But in our previous implementation, these changes for the actual button element. So here we are seeing this button. Let's focus to this part. When we click to it, here it is setting the class and it's also setting the disabled. But in reality, these changes for the actual button element. So our custom button element should be doing those updates in the button component it has in its inner HTML. But let's simplify our functions here. Instead of setting these values, like setting the content, setting this disabled, setting class, let's set a single attribute on this custom button. And based on that value, we will do whatever needs to be done inside our component. So let's say instead of doing these changes, we will just set login button, set attribute, and let's call our attribute name is in progress. And we will set it to true. And after the progress is completed, we are just going to remove this attribute. So we will do like this. We are going to login button, remove attribute in progress. So that's it. And based on this attribute, our custom component will do the rest. So if we click the button like this, so here we are seeing the in progress is added, and as soon as the operation is completed, that attribute is gone. Now we need to react to the changes of this attribute. So we cannot do that in this constructor, in HTML element class, there's a static method, and let's implement it. This method will be called when this button is defined as custom element, and this is a static method. And if you have Java background, this static is same with the one you use in Java. This is not specific to the object instance, but it is used for whole class. And in this method, we will return, so we will set get, so it's going to be a get method, and we will return array of attributes. So method name is observed attributes, and it's going to be return an array, and this array will be containing the attributes we want to observe. So for our case, we are going to observe this in progress attribute. Again, as string, we are passing this in progress in this array. And this will be triggering another method of this class to be called. And that method is attribute changed callback. This method takes 3 parameters. The first one is the attribute name. The second one is old value for this attribute, and the third one is the new value for this attribute. So let's log them right here. This is attribute, old value, and new value. So saving this one, and let's open the console here, clicking the login. Here it is saying in progress is initial value was null, and initial old value was null, and the new value is true. So it is writing here, and as soon as we remove the attribute, this method is called once again, and it is saying the in progress old value was true and now null. So this is called because of we are specifically telling that we are observing the changes in the in progress attribute of this component. So if we don't add this part, let's remove it. This method will not be called. Here we don't see that console log. So we must be adding the attribute we want to observe, as this method name implies. And whenever anything changes for that attribute, this method will be called with the attribute name and the value changes, the old value and the new value. Now we know how to react to the changes of our attributes. So let's do this implementation. We have here this text changes, this disabled setting the class usages right here in this attribute change callback. So removing this console log, this method is going to be called for the in progress attribute, but we would be observing multiple attributes. So here we should be doing control about for which attribute this method is called. For our case, we only have one field here, this one. So I'm not going to do the checks here, but keep in mind that this is going to be called with any element in this array. So if we have multiple items, then we should be doing our controls within this function. So first, let's get the button element. So we have this button right here, and we can get that button within this element by running this elements query by selector. So this is only going to be querying this element, this selector we are going to pass within this element itself. So this query selector, and let's get just the button. So we have the button reference right here, and we have seen this method is called when the in progress is set to true and when the in progress is set to null, when it is removed. So we will check this new value. So if new value has any value in it, if it is not null, which means if it has any value in it, any string value or anything, then this is true. So we will set button text content as loading, and we will set button set attribute disabled as true, and we will set button class list add fading, and the else condition, we will set the text content button text content as. Now we don't need to get the reference of the original value anywhere here, because we are receiving this text, this button text, as attribute already. So we can just use this one. So we can assign the attribute text to the text content of this button element, and we will remove attribute of disabled, and we will remove fading from this class list. So let's save this one. Now clicking the login, and here we see it is working properly. So with this way, our actual function, the action related function, is slimmer. We no longer need these parts. And all we do here is we are just doing the action, but we are also telling the button itself that the action is in progress. And the rest of the things, like the disabling button, setting styles, are handled within the element. Now let's replace the register button with our component 2. So here it was this one. Let's change it to app button, and let's remove this class. Let's set the text as register, and we no longer need to pass the child text. And let's update this function. We will just call this register button, and we will set attribute of in progress to true, and we will remove this attribute here after our action is done. Remove attribute in progress. By the way, we no longer need to have this original button text, because we are handling that inside our element. So the login function is like this. We are starting the progress, and we are telling the progress is done. And same thing for the register button. So both of these functions would be doing their own work, but for simplicity we are just printing a log like this. So saving this one and trying the register button, and here we are seeing the same styles and the things are applied for the register. So if we check the implementation right here, when we click the button, we are setting in progress, but the actual element, this app button, is doing the changes here in the button element. So it is setting the class, setting the disabled, setting the text for it. So those things are handled inside our custom element. Custom elements have lifecycle methods. These are called as custom element reactions, and so far we have seen two of them, the constructor and this attribute changed callback. Now let's see the others, and let's see this on another component. Let's create a new one right here. Let's call this one as counter. Again, extending HTML element. And let's have the constructor. So we will call super. And let's console log each of these methods. So in this one, let's run constructor. And let's make this component visible on the screen. So let's set this inner HTML as, let's say, temporary. And the other method is connected callback. We will see when this method is called. So this is going to console log connected. And the other one is this connected callback. And this is going to be printing this connected. And the next one is attribute changed callback. We have seen that one. So it has attribute old value, new value. Let's say console log attribute changed. And the last one is adapted callback. And let's say this is going to be printing adapted. And let's define this element here, custom elements define. And the element name is app-counter. And the class is right here, counter. And let's use the counter here, app counter. And here we are seeing this is visible. And in the console, we see the logs, the constructor, and the connected. So when our element is added to the screen, this constructor is called, and also this connected callback methods are called. Now let's do a scenario like this. First, let's remove these buttons, removing this app button and removing the corresponding scripts. So we only have the button, this class, and this counter. Again, we will add buttons, but these are going to be doing something else. So first, let's add a button, app button, and this is going to be for add. When we click this add, it's going to be adding this app counter to the screen. And we will have another button, app button, and this is for remove. And let's also remove this app counter and saving it. And let's show these buttons separate lines. So here in this style, adding a new one right here, we can use our element name like this, app button, and we can set display as block, so they will be separated to their own lines. And let's also make sure our app counter would be having same style, so it's going to be shown on its own line. Currently it's not in our document, but we will add it with this add button click operation. So let's set our function. For clicking, we are going to call this add function, and for remove, we will call this remove function. And let's define those functions right here. So this is for add, and this is remove. So when we click the add button, we will create an element of this app counter. So we are going to programmatically create this app counter. So with this way, we will be seeing how these lifecycle methods are working. So here in this add function, we are going to call document we are going to create an element, and the element is this app counter. So let's save this. So at this step, if we click the button, we can see the console log of constructor. So we are creating an instance of our component, but it's not in our document tree yet. And we also see this exception. This is happening because we are setting this inner HTML in constructor, but that element is not added to DOM yet. When we add this component directly to our HTML document, just like any other element we do, our code is working. But when we go with programmatically, it is failing. So that's why we shouldn't be doing anything related to DOM at the constructor. So let's remove this inner HTML part. Saving it and clicking the add button again, and here we see the constructor log is printed and we don't see any exception. Now we are going to add this element to our screen by document body append. We are going to add this to our document, but first let's assign it to a variable. Let's call it counter, and here we will add this counter to document. Now saving this one and clicking the add, and here we are seeing the constructor and connected. And if we check the element stub, here we have right here the app counter. It is added to the body. This is the body and it is appended right here. Since we have no inner HTML set for this component, there is nothing visible. So this method is called, this connected callback is called when our element is added to the DOM. So this is the method we should be doing all UI related things. So we can set inner HTML right here. This inner HTML is temporary. Saving this one, clicking add, and here we see the temporary is added, and if we click multiple times we will see it is added right here. So we have seen the importance of using this inner HTML in the connected callback, but in our button we didn't do that. So we need to fix it right here. Let's have connected callback, and we will have these lines, this text assignment part inside this connected callback. So if we save it, we will not see any changes, but the implementation is more robust now. If anytime we dynamically generate this button, component will properly work. It's not going to be throwing any exception or anything. Now we are adding this counter to our page, and let's implement the remove functionality. So here we are going to run document query selector. We are going to find the exact element, and we can query it by like app counter. There can be multiple app counters on the page, but it's going to be returning the first one, and we will just run remove function of it. So this is going to be removed from the screen. So saving this one and opening the console once again, clicking the add, and here we see the constructor and connected logs. And if we click the remove, the element is gone, and also we see the disconnected message here, which is printed because of this method. So this disconnected callback function is called whenever our element is removed from the DOM. Now let's add some functionality to this component. Let's say this component will be counting until to the number we set for it. So let's say here, when we are adding this counter to the screen, we are setting an attribute for it. Let's say counter will have an attribute of, let's say, until, and let's say we set it to 5. So So this counter is going to be counting until 5. Now in the element implementation, we used to use constructor for inner HTML, but now we have a real use case. Now this component will have a state value, so it's going to be having a count value. We are going to count from 0 to the number we set in the attribute. And best place to initialize this state is this constructor. So let's say we will have a property of this class, and it's going to be count. So we will do it like this. This will have a count, and initially it's going to be 0. And then here in the connected callback, our component is now part of the DOM. So first let's show the count. So this inner HTML will be this count. And then let's get the until attribute. So let's have until, and we get it by this. We'll have this attribute, so we get it like this. And we will update our count periodically. So we will use another JavaScript functionality, which is set interval. Just like set timeout, it takes 2 parameters. The first one is the callback function, which will be called back in each interval. And the interval is set like this as a second parameter. Let's say this is going to be a run in every second. So here this method is going to be called in every second. So what we will do here is, if this count is less than this until, then let's increment it. So this count will be increased by 1. And let's update our inner HTML with this new count. This inner HTML is going to be this count. So let's save this, and let's add a counter here, and here we can see it is counting from 0 to 5, and it is stopping there. But in this implementation there is a critical flaw. Now let's add a log right here in this set interval callback function. Let's console log. Interval is running, and let's print a dynamic value like date now here. Now let's add the counter, and here we are seeing interval is running, and the count is done, but this interval is still running. So even our component has nothing to do on UI part, our component is using resources. So after we reach to the count, we must be stopping this interval. So the thing we need to do here is, first, this set interval is returning back a number back to us. This is the ID of our actual callback function. So let's assign it to a property of this class like this. This interval is the returned value. And here, if we reach to the limit, to the until count, then let's, here in else condition, we are going to clear the interval by running clear interval function with the interval ID we have, interval. So saving this one, adding the counter, it is counting, and now it is stopped. So we are making sure our component is not using resources. Now let's do one more thing here, refreshing the page, adding a counter and clicking remove. Now we can see this, even the element is gone, we are still seeing this interval is running. So if our component is not visible, then it shouldn't be using the resources. So we can use this disconnected callback to clear the resources. So we will run once again clear interval right here in the disconnected callback. So saving it, adding the counter and removing it, and we are not seeing this interval repeating again. If our component needs to do periodic actions or cases like, let's say, our component will establish a WebSocket connection to backend, we will do them in the connected callback, and when our component is gone from the screen, we will clear those resources in disconnected callback. And we have seen the attribute change callback usage in the button. Let's not repeat that here. But let's focus to this last one, this adapted callback. This one does not have a very common use case. This callback is triggered when this element is moved into a new document. Now let's show this. To have multiple documents in a single page, we can use iframe. So here I'm going to add a new element right here, and this is iframe. And we are going to click the add. It's going to be adding the app counter to this page. And I'm just adding another button right here. And this button is for moving the counter we will have on this page to inside this iframe. So having another app button here. And it has the text of move, and when we click it, it's going to be triggering this move function. So let's implement the move here. Now, first, let's get the reference to the iframe. So having iframe here, and we will get it by document query selector with the element name iframe. And we are going to create a new document. Let's assign it as a variable here. Let's call it doc. And we will create it by document implementation has this create HTML document method. And it is taking the title. Let's say the title is new document. Now we are going to set the content of this iframe with the document we just created. And for that, we need to do like this. Let's say we will have a destination document, test document variable, and this iframe content document. Then we will run test document replace child with the first one is the new child and the second parameter is the old child. The new child is the newly created doc, so we will pass doc document element, and the old child is dest document element. So we are creating this iframe, we are creating a new document, and we are replacing this iframe's child with this newly created document. Now we will have a reference to our counter. We are creating dynamically through this add method, add function, and then here we can just query it and get it like this document query selector. And it's going to be app counter. And we can do like this. We can call destination document body, and we can append child to it. Append child. And here we are going to call dest document. It has adapt node function, and this function takes the element source, so we pass counter to it. So saving this one. Now we have this iframe on this page. If we just take a look at here, we have this iframe and it has another document right here. So just changing the size here. Now clicking the add, here we have the counter and clicking move, and as you can see, the counter is moved inside this iframe. And if we check the console logs, let's do one more time. Clicking the add, clicking the move, and here we see the counter is moved and the count operation is done. And if you check the logs here, the constructor, the connected, and that was the first time this item is added to our page, then here the item is being moved to the new frame. So first it's calling this connected method, so the interval stops there. Then it is calling this adapted callback is called. Then after this element is adapted to this iframe, again it is running this connected callback to show it on the UI. And again, this is triggering the interval, and it is going from where it left off. So in such cases, we can use this adapted callback function to do whatever needs to be done. So we can just set the count, the until, we can reset the counter, we can change the until, or anything like that. So if we summarize what we have practiced so far, in constructor, do not do anything about the DOM. This can be used to initialize the state value of this component. And in connected callback, we can do the DOM related operations, or we can start the repeating tasks in this method. And in this connected callback, we are cleaning up the resources we are using. And in attribute change callback, this is triggered when the attributes we are observing are changed, and this adapted callback is used in the cases like we have right here. So these are the lifecycle methods, and I'm going to clear this page a bit. We are not going to use this iframe, and we are not going to use this move buttons, and removing corresponding function too. So the current layout is like this. We have the add and we have the remove functionalities. Next, we will see the other functionalities of the elements by going on from this stage. In our custom button element, we have the attributes like this, text and in progress. Each HTML element have multiple attributes. The button element itself has the attributes like we are setting here, disabled, and the on-click or the others. Now let's see how the actual button elements attributes are behaving differently when compared to our custom element attributes. Now let's use this Chrome Developer Tools and let's play with the button element. So we can get the button element like this. We can run query through document, and we will use the query selector method, and we are going to query the button. This is the actual element name. This method is returning the first matching element. We have two buttons here. If we check it like this, we have our custom app button, and in it we have the button, and we also have the other app button, which is for remove, and we have the button in that one too. So when we run the query, we are selecting this one, this specific button element. So here, let's assign it to a variable like this. Let's say this is the button. And we are setting this button's disabled attribute. So let's try that one here. So if we run button set attribute with the disabled set as true, here the button is updated, and here we are seeing the disabled style is also applied to that one. And we can check the the value like this, we can just run button disabled. So this is this button's property, class property, and here we are seeing it is true. Now if we run button remove attribute, and let's remove the disabled, here the style is changed back to the regular button, and if we run button disabled like this, here it is returning back false. So this is happening because the disabled is not just the attribute of this button element, but also it is class property. And let's clear this part. We can set the disabled through the set attribute, but also we can run like this, button disabled, and we can assign the value true to it. So here we are seeing the button is disabled now. And if we check the elements right here, here in this button, we see this disabled attribute. And just like setting it to true, we can just set it to false like this. And the button is back to the default style. And if you check the button right here, the disabled attribute is gone. So when we do an update in one of them, either we set the attribute or we set the property, the change is reflected to the others. Let's also try the same thing for our custom element. So let's get the element first. Let's say this is app button, app b instance, and we will get it by document query selector, and our element name is app-button. So if we set the attribute app b set attribute, we are setting the attribute for our custom element of the in progress, and this was triggering whole change on our component, like changing the text, changing the style of it, and disabling the button. So we will see that reaction right here. We are setting in progress as true, and here the button is currently in progress state. But if we run just like we did for the button, if we run app button in progress, here we are receiving it is undefined. Or if we run app b in progress as false, we see nothing about it. So the class property methods are not working. We can only update our component via the attributes. So if we run app b remove attribute and we pass the in progress to it, here the button is back to the non-progress state. So to make this app button to work like the button in terms of the attribute and property synchronization, we will add the setter and getter methods for our properties. So the setter and getters are defined like this in JavaScript classes. We can let's add it right here. So this one is for setting, and our function will be in progress, and we will receive a value for this function. Let's call this is a progress, and based on the value, this can be true or false. So if the progress is true, in JavaScript we don't have to specify if it is equals to true. The value is either truthy or falsy. So if it is true, then we will be here in this if block. So what we will do is we will reflect the change to attributes, and we do that by running this set attribute with, we are going to set the attribute of in progress, and we will set it to true. And otherwise, if the progress is not true, so the else case here, we will just remove that attribute from this custom element. So saving this one. Now let's get the custom element once again in the console. Let's say it is app B, and this is auto-completing our previous query right here. So I have the app B, app button, and let's set the in progress as true. And here we are seeing the button is currently in progress. So basically this in progress is this set method, set function. So we are passing this value through to it, and based on this value we are setting the attribute, the in progress, to true. And since the attribute is changed for this element, this attribute is observed because we are observing this one in this method, and this attribute change callback is called, and then we are updating the inner button text content attribute and the class list. So that's how it is working. And if we go with the app B in progress, I'm just trying to get the actual result, and here it is saying undefined because we only have this set method for this property. To have a get functionality, we will add another one right here, get in progress, and basically we are going to return get attribute in progress. Saving it and running the same commands here, app B in progress to true. And if I type app B in progress, now I'm receiving this true because of this function we have here. And just like setting it to true, we can set it to false to stop the progress. So you may be asking, why are we doing this? Why do we need both of them? Since this component is basically a class, right here, this is a class, we can pass values to it through these properties. For the element attributes, they are only taking string values, but for the custom class properties, we can set any object we want. Attributes are useful for configuring the elements declaratively. So here, when we are adding it to right here like this, we can set the in progress or other attributes. So we would be declaring how this element to be behaving. And also the APIs like the accessibility and CSS selectors rely onto the attributes. So reflecting a property to attribute is useful anywhere we want to keep the element's DOM representation in synchronous with the JavaScript state of that custom element. So a scenario would be like this. Let's say we will have a new style for this button, and just like this hover or disabled, we can say, let's define it here, when this app button is having this attribute, the attribute is in progress, we can set it to something like this. We can just set transform, and let's scale this element, and let's scale just 10% like this. And for transformation, we can set the origin to top and left. Let's try this one. So currently, if we just click this one, we are not doing any progress right here. We are not setting this in progress. So that's why nothing is applied. But if we go here and get the button once again, and we set the in progress to true, here the button is scaled up, and this style we defined right here is applied. And if I go and set this value to false, the button is shrink back to the original size. Or we can just update this implementation right here. We can add a delay to appending this counter. So what we can do here, first let's get the button, add button. We will get the first one, and we will get it by document query selector, and we will get the app button. And initially we will set this add button in progress to true. Then let's have a set timeout here, and this is going to be running after 2 seconds. And in this callback we are just going to create a counter, and we will append to the body, and let's say we will add button in progress will be false. So saving this one and clicking the button, here we are seeing the button is scaled, and after that the in progress is gone and the counter is added. So with this way we are setting the class property, but since we are reflecting that change to element attribute, our CSS here is applied to it. It's not mandatory to do this, but it's recommended implementation, since an element can be added to document just like a regular HTML element, or it can be added just like we did here through the JavaScript. And when we have this instance access, we can set the values any way we want. We can go with the attribute, or we can go directly assign the property of the class. So to support both of these use cases, class properties should be reflected to the attributes. Now we have implemented our custom button, and we built it by extending this HTML element. Instead of that one, we could have extended the HTML button element. So we can extend the built-in button. So let's do that. First, we will replace this HTML element with HTML button element, and we will update this define part. We were passing this element name, and we were passing the class for that element, but when we are extending the built-in ones, we will add the third parameter here, and that is taking an object, and in this object we will tell this is extending the button. Now we can change the implementation we have here. We can just replace this app button with selecting them. So I selected them with the Ctrl D in Windows and changing them to just button. And here I'm going to add another attribute, and that attribute is, so this button is app button, and this is our element name. So doing the same thing for the other one. Now let's save this, and here we see the style is broken. We have styled button inside regular button. So the outer part is the default button, and the inner part is our custom button. So this is happening because in this connected callback, we are setting inner HTML to it. So we are adding a button inside a button. If we check the elements tab right here, here we have button, and in that button we have another button. So that's why this is looking like this. Now, since this is a button, we no longer need to set its inner HTML. So just commenting out this part. Now the button is looking like this. Now we have these buttons, but they don't have any text in it. So we are just seeing this part from the button. Since this is extending the default button, we can pass the text as a child to it, just like we do for the button. So let's say this is going to be add, and the other one is remove. So we have the add and remove buttons, and also we will apply the CSS classes, the btn, to this button. So doing it for both of these buttons, class is btn. Now we can see the button, but if we click it, the functionality is broken. And here we see the error. Because in this add functionality, we are querying app button, which is undefined, so that's why it's broken. So let's change this part. We are getting the button, not the app button. So we are querying this one. And let's save this. And if I click the add, here we have another problem. The counter is visible, but the style of the button is gone, because again, in this button implementation, we are querying this element to get the button, but now this is the button itself. We no longer need to query it, so we don't need this part. And let's change this part to just this. So this is the button, and we are setting its text content, we are setting its attribute, and we are adding a class to it. But there is one more thing we need to do. Here we are setting the text content through the attribute, but we don't need to have this text attribute if we want to go with the button like this. So instead of relying on the text attribute, we need to get the text content of the button. Let's get it right here. So we were getting the text from attribute, but now we can get the text, and let's assign this to as a property for this class. So this text, let's say this text is this text content. So we are copying this value to this property of this class, and then here when we are in progress, we are setting the text content to this value, and after the progress is done, we are going to revert back to the initial value, and that initial value is now in this text property of this class. So let's save this, and let's click the button. Here it is showing the loading, and it's going back to the add, and the functionality is properly working now. By the way, the button is not scaled anymore, because the CSS we have here for specific to app button. So if we just change to button, it's going to work. Let's try that. Here it is scaled up, and it's also overlapping to the remove button. So this is how we can extend the built-in elements, and we can add the functionality to them. Now we are extending the button capability, but this functionality is not supported by all the browsers. It's working with Chrome or working with the Firefox, Opera, or Microsoft Edge, but this extend functionality is not supported by Safari. And we can check here in this page, caniuse.com, to see which browsers are supporting this functionality. And if we highlight this part, it is saying that it is supporting autonomous custom elements, but not customized built-in elements. So this is not supported by Safari or iOS Safari or Internet Explorer 11. And we also have the other non-supporting browser here. But the green ones, the Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, and Android browser, these are supporting this web components, this custom elements functionality. Now let's see how it is working with Safari currently. So we have this page, so we are seeing these buttons, they are visible, And let's click the add. So here we don't see any progress about the ongoing action, but the counter is added and it is properly counting. For resolving this behavior, we can use polyfills. Polyfills are basically the functions, the JavaScript codes, which are simulating the functionality we are looking for. So for custom elements, we have polyfills, and for custom elements like this specific case, which is extending the built-in elements, we have polyfills too. So here in this page, we have this polyfill. It is showing the limitations or the use cases. Let's add this to our index.html. So adding it right before our script, where we are defining our custom elements. And let's try with this one. Again, clicking the add button. And now we are seeing the progress is properly shown. So with the polyfills, we can achieve the functionalities we are looking for. And also there is this page, this webcomponents.org, and it has this polyfills page. They have the polyfills for the different APIs of the web components. So the actual source code is right here, and we can get the CDN, or we can install that components library to our local environment and use them as a node module in our project. And here it is saying there is this web components bundle.js. Just import that one like this and then load your modules. So it's going to be supporting the functionalities coming with the web components. But again, there are issues, or there are missing parts here. So it's not covering all the cases, but it's covering most of the things we need for the web components. So we add this polyfill to our index.html, and currently in Chrome, if I click the add button, nothing is changed. It's properly working. So this polyfill is not breaking the existing functionality. It is just checking if that functionality is built in this browser. If it is not, then it is just adding the functionality coming with this script. Otherwise, it is just discarded. So that's how it is not affecting the behavior in the Chrome. And I'm not going to continue with this implementation. I'm not going to extend the built-in elements. So just removing this part, changing everything back to my component. So this was app button. This was app button 2, and there is no need to add this is here, and we also don't need to set the class, and we have this text, so we don't need to have a child right here. And let's update these two as app button, and we will update this part too. This is going to be HTML element, and just uncommenting this part and removing this text part and changing this part too. And this is going to be the button. And this is going to be, again, get attribute text like this. So we changed everything back. Also, let's remove this one from here. We are just defining an element with the name and the class. We are not extending the built-in button. So saving this one, and we have one more thing right here. We changed it to button, but it's now app button. So in progress, we will have this style, this scale up. And we also need to update this part too. We were querying the button because we changed this to just button, but now it is app button. And let's save this. and here clicking the add, and here the progress is visible and the button is scaled up and the functionality is properly working. So that's how we can extend the built-in button, and we can make it work with the Safari.